as for the agenda, first a few words about my background before I show you 3 current projects I'm engaged in, so as to illustrate the different aspects that interest me with regard to this topic. And start about myself, a brief introduction. I'm coming from the middle of nowhere in Europe, so it's Kaiserslautern is located in the largest wooden area in Europe. So it bears resemblance in one or the other instance to Boulder. It's not that beautiful, but it's also quite mountainous and very. People love sports, especially soccer. We're soccer men in the city, and but people love to run, to go bicycling. So it's quite similar to here in this regard. And the university as such, University of Kaiserslautern-Landau, is also similar to Boulder and Colorado, divided into 2 different locations, Kaiserslautern and Landau. K-Town, as the Americans call it, because we have the largest US airbase outside the US in Kaiserslautern. It's called Rammstein actually, but it belongs to Kaiserslautern, and there are about 50,000 US soldiers stationed every day, and 100,000 inhabitants of the city of Kaiserslautern, which is why it's called K-Town. A lot of Americans are there as well. So the bears resemblance, and the Kaiserslautern location where I work is focusing on technological issues, especially engineering and informatics and mathematics. So this, I think, bears resemblance as well. Although I'm a humble business administration guy, to be frank. And we have the German Center for Artificial Intelligence, DFKI is the German abbreviation for it, and the Smart Factory. And these are in Germany these renowned institutions in the respective sciences. And the German Center for Artificial Intelligence has by now 5 locations in Kaiserslautern, the headquarters and the initial part. And I'm heading the chair of strategy, innovation, and cooperation with a focus on, at least it's my main part, innovation and digitalization. Again, from the managerial part, more on that in a second. And as for my personal background, my family also likes to engage in sport. My wife is a medical doctor and always tells me what I do wrong. And my children, especially, it was nice when I had this introductory talk by Mark and Rocher, etc. When you all introduced yourself and all the students were there. And I explained it even in the evening to my family at the table, that I left to see what you all did and during this round tour. And then my son, my 14-year-old son, the soccer mat guy, he playing for the Boulder Panthers, by the way. I said, Daddy, that's real science, what they are doing, not what you are doing. I said, look, I'm a social scientist. I'm interested how people engage with one another to organize innovation. Stop it. I know what you want to say, but you know, real scientists. I'm real scientist. So I had to, on Friday, but I didn't meet you. I had to meet them here around and show them the offices, and everything was amazing for them, especially for him. So I'm not a real scientist, but I try to. And maybe as for my objectives, why I am here, then it's also the last slide for the intro stuff. I usually say that I found it quite resonating to what Mark said at the introductory talk, because my dissertation might sound like a joke in Germany, but my dissertation was about positive emotions at work. So humor, fun, which you don't necessarily associate with Germans. But this was my dissertation topic, and I also liked when Mark said, have fun and then learn. You have to have fun to learn. So that's why I'm here. I counted it. I'm in my 51st semester by now. I'm also here. This resonated with Rocher to connect and to invite also people to Germany if they like to do Kaiserslautern, be students or researchers. I'd like to embrace the culture of the institute, but also, of course, the US American culture. And apart from that, I have, since I'm on a so-called research semester, which is like a research sabbatical for professors, which can be taken every 4.5 years in Germany. I have to fulfill some objectives, and my objectives I signed with the president of the university was to write a book about the role of AI in innovation management and an article about League of Legends. That's great. I'm not into it, but my doctoral candidate is into it. And we are researching how the professional players, how their emotions influence the way they play. So I don't link this project, but it's quite fun actually. Although I'm not a player myself. Anyhow, so that's so much about my background, and now 3 different takes on innovation management from my field, which might be maybe even of interest for you or just to inspire you. The first one is resided in the theory of path dependence, and Does anyone know what path dependence is about, just out of curiosity in social sciences?
No.
So it starts with this beautiful layout of this typewriter, and it has the so-called QWERTY layout attached to it. Exactly. And the interesting thing now from the innovation scholars perspective, at least from my perspective, is that you had technological jumps in between. So to the electric typewriter, it remains the same. To the layout as in this keyboard, it remained the same. And of course, it remains still QWERTY with regard to the digital devices. And the interesting thing is that it's highly inefficient. It was efficient for the manual typewriter so that the strings don't interfere. So this was the optimal solution, but we could all, you can Google it with Amazon, Alibaba, etc. We could buy much more efficient keyboard layouts. It would take us 2 or 3 weeks to relearn, so to speak, the typing, and then if we would, for the younger folks here. And we would be much faster. And that's of interest for us as innovation scholars or strategic management, that we still stick to this layout, although it's highly inefficient, especially when you think about the US, where everything, at least from a European perspective, is geared towards efficiency. Why do we stick to such an inefficient keyboard if we could be much faster? And this is what path dependence is about. And if you tie it more to the corporate world, it's about why do organizations oftentimes stick to established patterns when they are successful, such as the Kodak Corporation, where the Kodak moment was like, I have to Google something, I have to search for something in the internet. The Kodak moment was taking a picture. And Kodak was the famous photographic company, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in the world. And they even invented digital photography, but the top management team repeatedly rejected the idea to embrace digital photography because that's not real photography. At the beginning, it was quite pixeled, quite clumsy. And the top management decided to ignore it, although they invented it, because they were so successful with analogous photography. Path dependence is about that you stick, especially when you're successful, to established patterns. And it's difficult to break out of these habits, patterns, etc. And this is what I researched with a doctoral candidate of mine. And research primarily revolves around a single path, so such as sticking to analogous photography, and then maybe things about how to open up to a new path and then decide between these two paths. But what is so far not taken into consideration is that you might have two paths in parallel. So let's say analog and digital photography for the sake of argument. And if these, or the question arose, if these two paths can coexist, so analogous and digital photography in the same organization, so to speak. And we took a look at a large telecom corporation with a magenta color. So you have the same, I think, here, T-Mobile. That was a German corporation. And they were sticking with their managerial routines, how they develop new software in, to the so-called waterfall principle, which is very much like German engineering, step by step, and you don't go back and forth. So you have to execute it very. So that was what they did very successfully, but it throughout the course of time that it became not, let's say, sufficient for ever-changing, faster customer demands and technological developments, and that's why they became the waterfall management technique became problematic, and they decided to, in addition to this elder path, thinking about path dependence, to open up a new path, i.e. engage in managerial techniques which are labeled agile management techniques. And this led to a clash because, for instance, the HR department paid every person according to criteria that were in line with the waterfall principle. Or finance and controlling were still sticking in their minds, very German, no, you have to do take the board, and it didn't fit to the new agile management techniques. And so there were always fights in the organization, and some people loved it, especially the younger ones. Some people hated it, the new one, such as those guys sticking to the waterfall principle. And it, nonetheless, over the course of time, when we researched it, it showed that both can coexist, and they developed some kind of ambiguous way, a big way of dealing with it. And you could observe these fights between the old path and the new path, but at the end of the day, the organization somehow accommodated for it. There are still ongoing fights, I know it because I'm still in contact with them, but they also generated synergies. So that was quite funny to observe. And the biggest challenge was actually the cultural fit. So between the, let's say, younger guys engaging in agile management techniques and embracing the uncertain novel technologies or management styles such as Scrum, etc. Whereas the elder people love to stick to the things, thought about retiring soon, etc. So they were constantly still are still constantly fights, but somehow it turned out to be successful. Yeah, okay. Then as for my second case study, I'm engaged with a doctoral candidate of mine who works for an SME, a rather large SME, that produce pumps for all kinds of B2B purposes. And in some niche, they are really successful on a global scale. And this guy is working in the innovation lab and heading one of the innovation labs, where they start new ideas from within the company or in a, let's say, like a separate lab, or not greenfield, but in a separate unit, so that they can generate more radical innovations. And nonetheless, the concern, the overarching organizational structure imposes several constraints on them. So think about monetary constraints or HR-related constraints in terms of how many personal resources are being invested, etc. Or of course financial concerns. And our first premise was, how does the organization deal with the different constraints? So if you got less and less money, or the cost of time, similar to, at least in my case in Germany, to university funding, it gets less and less and less, and somehow we have to struggle with these different needs and ever more difficult situations. And we found out that throughout the innovation process, the organization dealt and the teams dealt differently. If you think this is like an innovation funnel, dealt differently with the constraints. And interestingly, we found out in several, let's say, sub-case studies that the constraints were actually enabling. So for instance, they focused the teams in terms of the vision they had, or motivated it. So we are the underdogs, or we have not enough money, but we still make it. And there were several instances where, to our more or less surprise at least, the constraints had a, let's say, positive connotation or led to positive results. And this is what we are currently working on, to conceptualize this, how to deal with constraints, not necessarily viewing them only as negative and to get rid of it and complain about it, but how to productively deal with constraints. So again, think about monetary constraints. You get a lower budget for the next year, or less personnel, etc. And this, along this innovation journey, what we try to sketch and figure out how to deal with it. This is ongoing, yeah, that's why I have only preliminary results. And here it is also from the book project and some empirical stuff I started in Germany. Now, as a third insight into what I'm currently engaged with, the interest of, or my key interest in terms of how does AI support the innovation process? And of course, there are numerous examples. So again, German example, Telecom, just a chance again, gathered all the works of Beethoven and finished his 10th symphony, because he died and just started the 10th symphony. A few years ago, they finished it, and it was shown in the opera, or conducted in the opera. And there I had, or think about, more close to your initial science-related inquiries about innovation processes in the pharmaceutical industry when new drugs are being developed. Whereas you had in the beginning numerous technical assistants trying to check which kind of ingredient, when they develop a new drug, might interfere with another ingredient so that it becomes harmful for the patient. This can be done by far faster, of course, in terms of depth and breadth by means of AI, and technical assistants can do more important things. So it's faster in terms of depth and breadth, is more efficient. And also the question, is looming, as Ray Kurzweil calls it, are we nearing singularity, i.e. that we develop a broad or strong AI instead of these weak AIs that we have by now. I'm a bit skeptical of it. I don't know about your position, but that's what's being discussed, that AI may overtake human intelligence, also the breadth, not only in the depths, like a single application such as ChatGPT for certain specific or Midjourney, etc., for certain specific tasks, but in general. I'm skeptical about it, but this is being, I think, debated, or at least in the fields I'm familiar with. And it is always argued that somehow we might become all obsolete, because if you can finish the 10th symphony, or if you can speed up the innovation process, you don't need hardly any human beings anymore, because AI will do everything. And it reminds me a bit of the, at least in the German setting, discussion about smart factory settings, or in earlier times automation, when everyone was thinking computers are making us redundant. And I'm a bit skeptical about it, but that's the way it was being discussed in Germany. And at present, the same holds true also, at least partially on a global scale. For instance, Frey and Osborne a few years ago, two scholars from Cambridge, found or documented that 60% of US jobs might be susceptible to automation. So we might become redundant due to automation. And interestingly, not only blue-collar jobs, but also white-collar jobs, such as scholars like us, such as people in finance, controlling, etc. So there is some buzz around it, although I doubted that it will be this way. And so far from reading the literature and engaging with a few companies in Germany, I think that as good news, I think we ought to embrace AI, and it's useful. We shouldn't shy away from it. But I doubt so far that it really entirely replaces us, and students will only come without seeing us and just engage with NI only, at least. And that's what I doubt. Moreover, I suggest, or I presume so far that AI, at least in elder industrialized nations such as Germany, should be used in order to make up for the labor shortage. I don't know about the US, but I think in Japan and Germany, we have this severe problem that there are less and less people in the workforce, and somehow you have to make up for all the, especially elder people who retired, and somehow deal with them. Which is why I think instead of in Germany we say verteufeln, so like saying this is the devil, AI, embrace it and make use of it constructively, I think. And I think, again, I think I'm more optimistic about it. It's not only a hope, but I think that genuine creativity will only come from us humans, because I think even if you consider my examples, of course, AI is faster researching a database in the case of developing a new drug, or can gather as an input, you can give all the works of Beethoven to the AI, but in the end, its creativity is dependent upon the input, so data quality and quantity. And of course, you could argue novel human inventions are oftentimes also just a recombination of existing stuff. I would agree that to a certain extent with that thesis to a certain extent, but I think AI is even more dependent on the data quality and quantity that you offer as input, and that's why I think we as human beings are still more creative. And as a brief question now to you guys in this context, since your claim is also being shown here, and I saw it and I'm amazed, and as my son said, you're a real scientist, I would like to ask you so how do you embrace AI in your daily work and novel technologies in general, but maybe AI? I saw it sometimes, but does it come handy also on a very low level, or is it just in a very sophisticated manner that you are coding sophisticated stuff, or there's some opinions I'd love to hear from the audience.
For instance, I only use it for helping me out with stuff like I don't know, some concepts. I ask ChatGPT about it, or or if I need some help, let's say coding and how to code this specific microcontroller, stuff like that. But I also agree with you that I'm not sure AI will be able to make us obsolete in a sense that it only works with what has been done. And it takes away all the creativity that us humans have. And for instance, by joking around or being silly, we can come up with really good ideas. That's not something that AI does. So, yeah. Pretty sure. As far as I know, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I also agree with that idea because I think like Beethoven is he pushed the music era from classical into romanticism. Yeah. But I think AI can only, like, for example, the 10th symphony can only generate the data set before, but it cannot create after. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So I'm also happy that you're watching.
So, so AI is good for supporting the creations, but it cannot replace our creations.
You're asking or saying?
I just want to make sure.
Confirm.
Confirm it, yeah.
Is this sorry conflict now?
Are you
Oh.
asking a question or are you
Yeah,
making a
is it a
statement?
statement or is it a question to me?
So,
What's your opinion?
so I have a question. When we have ideas, can we use AI to produce the outline first, then we put the creation into it? Like, we use AI to build the outline.
Yes, I
That's a
think it
tool.
works, yeah.
It
So,
works.
so for instance, for a talk I recently in Germany back, I tried to sketch, sorry, for a curriculum that I have. I teach strategy and technology to bachelor students. And I thought it needs a rehaul, so last year. And then I asked ChatGPT for a German bachelor class, blah, 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 the German Technical University. What would you propose would be a modern curriculum? What would be the contents, blah, blah, blah. So show it to me. And then interestingly, admittedly, out of the 14 sessions, I added 2 out of the unjudgeable overlaps, frankly speaking. But one was so obvious, it was Industry 4.0, which is a conception originated from 2 of the former, one of the former SAP founders, Mr. Kagermann. And I thought, we have a smart factory here, and the whole university is about it. And it was like, I didn't see it, although I collaborate with these guys who invented it. So I felt quite stupid because I was in my usual corridor of, okay, they need to learn about technological development curves about disruptions and how to deal with disruptions from pagan Christianism, etc. So I was very much in the mindset of US scholars and what they teach. And I didn't take a look at my German fellow colleague next door. So I felt quite stupid, but I found it quite useful. So coming back to your idea of a framework of a basic foundation, and that towards this end, I found it quite useful. And then I dig deeper and researched myself how to build up the curriculum. So yes, I employed myself, I must admit. Then of course I customize it, but to bounce back some ideas, like having a brainstorming session with a digital partner. It sounds maybe a bit nutty, but for those purposes, it helps me.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, so I feel like I like to use, for example, ChatGPT like as a supporting tool, for example, for proofreading some of my texts, as like English is not my first language, and sometimes I'm not sure about grammatical errors. And that really helps. I feel like I also learn by doing that. And so I like to use it like as a support, not to replace my work or something like this. I always write the stuff myself, but like to check grammar. I really like to use it sometimes.
And do you also employ it for creative purposes?
I did that like before sometimes, but I feel like it could give you like a direction, but like not I really like to create stories or like ideas myself. So as you said, like the bouncing back, I'm also doing that. They can give me input, I can give it input, and yeah, that's like kind of how it works brainstorming wise for me. Yeah.
I also experienced it when I use, for instance, ChatGPT to generate ideas. That the more context specific it gets, the less and less it is of value, because it's informed by the vast of information from the internet, metaphorically speaking. But if you really want to have a specific idea that is customized to your specific needs, then I also found it, at least so far, I didn't find it to be of any use, well, not of any use, but to be really useful, so that I can actually work with it and build upon the idea that was being generated. And so, for instance, for this afternoon for Derek and John, I prepared a small presentation idea, because they asked me to present something, and there I found it also, although it's a bit of a different take, but interesting that there's so much dependent upon the programmer who actually programmed ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. And in the case of Gemini, I don't know if you're aware of it. I found it quite strange that, or embarrassing, especially from a German perspective, that at one point in time they decidedly went for diversity in terms of how they programmed it. Do you know the example, or because you're smiling?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Being Austrian, and then they showed screenshots where people went for World War II soldiers, and they were persons of color also in Nazi uniforms. And so then Gemini or Google accused and said, "Oh, sorry, I think we overstretched it with the diversity here at this point in time." And so it was quite delicate. In Germany, it was heavily debated. Diversity is good, but how to, in a way, deal with such a situation that you have a person of color in Nazi uniform? So portraying them as, it was a result. The prompt was something like, "Show me soldiers in the Second World War in different uniforms," or something like that. And then it was being generated. And so this, of course, also raises ethical questions related to creativity, how to deal with this situation. Or Vikings was the other example I found for tonight. That the question was, show me some Vikings, and there were
Vikings of
Vikings. Yeah, it was a bit embarrassing.
Everybody can be a Viking.
Yeah, and Google, of course, excused for it. Yeah. And in your, if I may ask, in your daily use.
Well, so for me, I have played with the crayon, so it's like the Mid Journey, but the smaller version. And when we were doing the sketch club, so every day there would be a prompt, like owl or a table or something, and you're supposed to draw something. And so I have some idea, and then I come up with different idea, and I would change the prompt. I see what I come up, I say, oh, that got me another idea. So I keep doing that. And I will reject many different pictures, but then I keep changing my prompt until something, oh, I like that. Okay, now I'm gonna do something like that, because I'm using that as an inspiration.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of fun with that, because then it feels like it knows which way I'm going, because I keep changing the prompt, right? So if I see the Viking or I see the people, then I might change it to something like wrong. They need to be watercolor, need to be crayon, need to be something. So that was good. And the other part is that I use Gmail all the time. So Gemini would say, help me write. And once I write something, I say, help me write. I look at them. Most of the time that I still go back to where I am, where I did, but then some of the suggestions, I don't like that. And then I put that. So I change a little bit. So it gave me more options about when I write, whether the tones or whether the ideas. And sometimes they say, I think in the selection, it can help me write and make it more professional, or make it more agreeable, or make it something. And so I play with that. To me, that was kind of creative and fun. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
You, Mark?
I have a complex set of emotions around this. I don't use AI in general. I have played around with both the image creation software and ChatGPT a little bit. But one reason I don't is that my work as director of the Institute is mostly not creative. So the question doesn't make sense, right? I'm not doing creative work. I'm frustratingly, but so why would I use AI? then the few experiments that I did with ChatGPT made me very distrustful of it. So I asked it to write a Wikipedia article about a colleague of mine in Japan, and it got about 70% of it right, but then it invented some facts about her that are just wrong. And I thought, well, okay, this is, and then I asked the ChatGPT to write a press release about some event here at Atlas, and it came out fine. I showed it to my wife, who had been a professional editor. And she said, this is really, I didn't tell her it was AI generated. She said, this is really boring. You should make it more interesting. So this is sort of reasons why I don't. Now, we're in very early days of the use of large language models and stable diffusion. So, I think it's too soon to ask this question. But over my career, I've lived through many cycles of computers can't be creative, computers, right? I mean, sort of this, so this is in some sense, the old wine in new bottles story, and I think I'm not surprised. So when I started at an architecture school, I was a proponent of computers are going to change the way we do design, and everybody really got angry at me because the pencil, the crayon, the paper, the whole feeling, right? And I was like, well, okay, fine, but that's not so the other promise to me, I was always interested in artificial intelligence back from high school. I was reading artificial intelligence PhD dissertations in high school because I got fascinated. But what interested me and still interests me is how does the codification, the coding of intelligent processes tell us something about how we think or about the nature of intelligence itself? And what's frustrating to me about these large language models, I accept that they do what they do and they will get better, but it's disappointing because I always wanted AI to inform us about intelligence, the nature of intelligence itself, and how we think and sort of understand our own cognition. And it does nothing. So far, it's not explainable. So it comes up with a picture of whatever it is we ask for, but we don't have any way to account for what that is. So it's sort of less interesting than I want it to be. And that's because, well, okay, symbolic AI or old school AI just like got beat. It's gotten beaten by large language models. And so that's my complex set of emotions. Now, I also think that we as an institute are not doing enough to understand this. And I'm in an occasional conversation group called Deep Design in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And the idea is to answer these kinds of questions that you're poking at. So I'm more than happy. And we had this morning, I don't know if you were there, the Nicholas Clausen from Google about the AI and ethics. So there's a series of conversations we should be having about these things. I'll add one more thing and then I'll stop talking. I know you mentioned constraints and creativity in the beginning. So do you know the Stravinsky quotation?
No.
Without constraints, there can be no creativity. Yeah, the composer. Without constraints, there can be no creativity.
Because it focuses, yeah.
Yeah, and it forces you to make, right? Otherwise, you can do
Choices.
anything goes. But if it's constrained, then you actually have to work within some system. And of course, artists and designers don't like to hear that unless they're real artists and designers, in which case they absolutely understand that you're working with constraints all the time. And that's the challenge. And that's what gives you the pleasure when you succeed at doing something that was constrained, whether it's visual or auditory.
I fully agree, although there are oftentimes also, I think, proponents who argue, at least in the debates I follow in my field, that the more slack you have, the better it is, and the more you are endowed with money, etc. And think about Google's, I forgot the name. What's the name? There's an initiative, or was by Google, that every employee can have X% of hours free and devoted for whatever they like.
Yeah.
So, and this is oftentimes by these proponents then quoted. I don't share it. I'm skeptical as you, but this is oftentimes touted to be the prime example of the more the better. And if you have nothing to do, then you become creative. And this is at least the underlying mantra in the literature I follow. I'm skeptical of it as well, again, but that's why they propose that it's good to have a lot of resources, and then you can come up with really creative ideas if you have no constraints. And also Monika Wittig, although I shared most of her perceptions from last week, it was a great talk, I think, also mentioned that in the COVID crisis times, money wasn't the problem. And so this in a way speaks also to the argument that if you can say, well, I need the money now, and due to a crisis you get it, it's more convenient to innovate the masks. And this also, yeah, I once researched the so-called EHEC outbreak in Germany, where people died from sprouts. And long story short, also when I interviewed the medical doctors in the different hospitals, they said it was a wonderful time for us because of the political pressure to solve the situation. We could work as doctors, which we usually could not because we are drowning in administrative work. And now we could really help the patients and figure out new intriguing ways how to deal with this messy situation. And we get machines from the UK or the US and deal with kidney failures. This hemolytic syndrome is called. And then it was heaven for them. They told me really consistently. And maybe as a side remark, because you mentioned also your role as a director, what I really like here, I think it's very well designed, pun intended, that you have all these different disciplines around here, because what I know from corporations in Europe, they try to design it like this, so that people from different disciplines bump into one another. So they think about where to put the coffee machine, simply between departments, usually in the middle between departments, so that they bump into another, get into a conversation, and then become creative by looking beyond their, let's say, disciplinary boundaries. And I think this is almost optimized here, because when you go to the toilet, or I don't know where the coffee machine is, maybe downstairs, but you bump into one another, or for
Yeah,
instance,
that's the intent. I don't know how well it works, but.
yeah, but I think this nudging to quote Mr. Sunstein, was it Sunstein? I think Sunstein and Taylor. Does it ring a bell to anyone? These are two Nobel economists, yeah, from the US, who invented this idea of nudging. So how to push people's behavior into intended directions, and this would be one way to put the coffee machine somewhere.
Could you go back to your first slide, so?
To my very first
Slide.
Oh, I don't know, the first few I can remember.
which one? Tell me which one.
Well, one thread that caught my attention was the two paths, the path dependency.
Parallel.
Like, because we see this over and over again, and we see it in the university too, right? We do things,
Yeah.
we can't accept a second paradigm, and so Kodak dies.
So what's
I-
that?
I mean, what's- No, I'm trying to remember the question, but.
So this is
So, yeah, so therefore, what did you decide, or what did you discover? What's the outcome of this?
so we worked with them, and they found how shall I put it? They found actually customized ways how to deal with it. So there was not a complete rollout in the organization that, let's say, half of this team is working in an agile fashion, the other half in a waterfall fashion. They, in a way, ask the people and by and large try to find ways by respecting the different wishes, and they self-align to what kind of way they aim or prefer to work with, if possible. Admittedly, they lost a lot of employees because they said, I don't want to work in this way, if they were first asked, and then they could and went to other companies. But it also, on the positive side, attracted a lot of young folks desperately needed, because it was formerly a public institution. It was a public provider of postal services, etc. So it was desperately needed to have fresh blood. So it balanced. It was a self-selection process, and it turned out to be. It is still contentious, but it works out to be, or seems to work out more or less well. And so people are coming to terms with it.
Yeah, I mean, this path dependence kind of reminds me of like how design is also like learned or studied, because like in my university, my professors always told us, don't reinvent the wheel. Like some icons are they just stuck with people. Maybe they're not as efficient there as they could be, but everybody is used to them, and so they're using them. So that kind of reminded me like the path dependence thing.
Yeah, sure. It can have several reasons. So path dependence in general can for instance, be related back to, in this case, for instance, among others, for instance, simply pride or emotion. So we are the photographic company. Engineers from Color Corporation, and it's no kidding, were running around when they themselves again invented digital photography, or some of the R&D department, ran around at conferences in their field, the B2B field, with shirts having a dinosaur on it and quoting, "I'm proud to be a dinosaur." So they were really, but it shows the heritage. It's a heritage company. They were really proud of this company, and they couldn't imagine, although being developed by their own company, that this might be the future of the digitalization. And because it was so proud of it. Or more, in other instances, it's simply money. So for instance, in Germany, we had a large-scale failure in terms of developing a new airport in Berlin, at the Berlin-Brandenburg International Airport. It's now operating and well. My parents-in-law yesterday, no, today started from Germany to LA. That's why I know it. It seems to work. And the argument was, we have poured so many millions into this mega project, or billions. So the next, we miscalculated, but the next 500 million, so what? Because it costs 3 billion, so 500 million more, so what? Do you want to leave it like a, you know, like a ruin, or 500 million more and have a nice fancy airport? Now it's nice and fancy, but this was the argument over the years. So pouring money into this might also lead, culminating in path dependency. And oftentimes also closely related to this group, so cognitive lock-ins, or we think about groupthink. I don't know if you know how the, it's also in my field, a common example, the space shuttle Challenger disaster took place. You could explain it by saying, well, there was a missing O-ring, and this caused.
There was the corporate structure.
Yes, in the evening before it, they sat together, and there was some people saying we shouldn't start. We think that there's a problem. At that point, I think it was unknown that it was the O-ring which caused the havoc. But from the top managerial guys, they were simply overruled and saying, "Look, the president is saying this must be a success, and we need to start it tomorrow, and the weather is fine, etc., etc." And so they were overruled. And this was here similar in the board when they said, "No, it's fine that you have developed digital photography, but look at the clumsy, lousy results." And they showed it compared to a nice DNA or DIN 100 at that time resolution of a picture, and it was simply like very pixelated and very bad. And they said, "Look, this can't be the future." And then they said, "Okay, but we think, get rid of it." So I think these situations are quite common and can have different kinds of explanations why you try to defend the old and get rid of the newer ideas. And I also think, at least in my case in Germany, it's oftentimes the hand. Sorry,
Oh, JP, you have a question?
Sorry for not reacting earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question. Actually, I'd like to jump back to slide 12. Actually, where you had that, so that funnel. Actually, what I was interested in was the corporate boundary and what was crossing the corporate boundary. And now, given the conversation of the last 5 to 10 minutes, you're talking about the mythos of corporations that create a culture, and whether that's part of the corporate boundary as well.
Yes, I fully agree. Thank you for the question. Starting with the end of your question, I think the cultures in organizations, company is quite decisive, and be it a university setting or for-profit setting, doesn't matter, of course. And this is hard to change for the good and for the bad, and certainly frames how people think within a corporation, one or the other way, for the good and for the bad. And this is certainly a hurdle to be overcome, especially if you want to change something. So think about the path dependence example, changing from the waterfall style to the agile management style. You certainly, the organization certainly encountered problems because the mindset was so much on the waterfall principle and what's being established and works well and successful, in brackets up until now only. And then changing this mindset especially in German setting, was tremendously difficult. And the same was true here, how you deal with certain ways of constraints. So for instance, usually at the beginning in this organization, which is more or less classical, you have constraints or you have checks and balances in terms of try to evaluate the creativity. And then later on try to evaluate the likelihood that it will succeed in the market. So it turns to financial constraints being imposed or criteria being imposed upon how to evaluate the innovation process per se. And maybe later on ethical, just for the sake of argument, ethical musings might come into play. Well, how does it sell on the market for this and that kind of group, or do we stir some kind of friction with I don't know, with certain ethical standards, etc. Or think about legal standards. And so these constraints change over the course of time, and they are also differently dealt with. And sometimes we discovered that political games were played, no surprise, of course, but then people in later stages reverted to elder constraints and said, well, look, I think it wasn't that creative, or I always said that that it might not be very successful monetary wise, etc., etc. So there are a lot of micro-political gambles, of course, also going on, which severely might foster or impede or downgrade potential product or service to be developed.
Thank you.
So, then I'll yeah, please.
Well, yeah, no, I'm trying to remember the question I had, but this conversation has been too interesting, so I lost track of it.
So
No, it was
you said about
something
the
to do.
requirement and how to deal with a different balance, a different.
No, this was another question. This had to do, there's vaguely had to do with the role of industry and the university and what the interaction across those boundaries could be. And I ask this because would like to see more industry involvement in the research that we do at the Institute, but it's difficult to, it has been difficult to make a successful collaboration with many industries. And so what are we doing here that is, I mean, it was around those questions. There was something in your earlier part of the presentation that triggered that thought, but I don't remember.
It's also something we're constantly working, and we're pushing the boundaries and then annoying my colleagues. We could talk about it later. But
okay. Yeah, I mean, this is
vital, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just to briefly wrap up. I try to draw your attention to the fact that there at times is the possibility of different paths to be pursued. The culture plays a key role, but also thinking about the case study with the constraints. Not all constraints are bad, and it's a question of how you deal with them. And not only as a hope of myself, but also as a more or less objective or a subjective interpretation, but trying to be objective. I think AI won't make us all redundant. So that's at least also my hope, but I think my observation as of now. That's all. Thank you very much. Any questions or?
One question.
Please.
So there's agile and waterfall.
Yes.
But when we start a project, we have to think about, is this project fit to waterfall or agile? And if we want to choose waterfall, then how can one implement AI into it for the waterfall and for how can I implement AI into the agile and waterfall? Like how can one? Do you have any example?
I have only a humble example from what I teach in terms of design thinking, which is an agile management technique, which is user-centric. And there, for instance, one of the phases, I also met a colleague here of yours who worked actually for the Hasso-Plattner Institute, where in Stanford it was being developed and brought to Potsdam, where I also worked at the institute by chance. When it comes to ideation, this is one phase where you try to generate new ideas, and the brainstorming process for the sake of argument, similar to what Ellen reported with her crayons. You might use it as to bounce back with the AI initial ideas and say, we had a user which was, I don't know, a young punky guy who only had one leg and tried to come to the university. If you try to redesign the arrival experience here for the sake of argument, what could be done, or if it was a blind person, what could be done to improve the process to find the building or whatever, and then just see what the AI generates out of the vast amount of information from the net, and most of it might be not necessarily useful, but it might, similar to my maybe also not really useful comment, but might stimulate Mark's thinking to say, well, it brought me to an idea. So in this bouncing back and forth, like a brainstorming session can be easily done with AI, and that's, I think, also useful, similar to your crayon example. But of course, you always have to be, the usual disclaimer applies, careful. Think about the Gemini generated Nazi uniforms with persons of color.
Good, thanks.
Do you think that since like AI, when you're like using it in an innovative process or for brainstorming, that AI being bad is actually kind of a better thing, because that way it makes more wild ideas in a different way?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Why AI is bad, and then
Like, do you think it's like actually a good thing if AI doesn't give like relevant responses or what you'd think you would respond with, because that way it kind of forces you to think in a
outside of the box?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, in a way, yes. I think you always need your human, what's it called in English? Mindfulness when dealing with AI. Let's put it this way. But I think it can be beneficial because the ideas, even if they're also one of you, I forgot who it was, mentioned that some stupid ideas might help. So this might be the case. In any case, you want to go outside of your conventional box of thinking, and then AI, even if it's a stupid idea, as long as it triggers useful idea, why not? Yeah. So I think I'm positive about it. I'm skeptical in general, but I think for this purpose and within this agile method, design thinking, also relating it back to your colleague, fellow student, I think it certainly helps.